Hello everyone and welcome to this video. This is a slightly different video than what I normally upload because this video has been prompted by a talk that I gave recently about the arts and about the role the arts and also literature plays in our lives. For those of you that have been using my channel for a while, you will know that literature is what I specialise in. That is what the content of my channel often is. And when this channel was set up about 4 years ago now, the ethos of the channel in my mind was not exam, let's just get through these exams. The ethos of the channel is before you get to that point, the belief that literature is valuable and has relevance. And I spend my time with students trying to convince them that that's true. That literature is not just about sitting exams. There is a value to it that we have forever. It just so happens that at the moment, at least, students are assessed mainly in exams. So this video is all about me defending the arts and saying in our busy modern lives, the arts have relevance to us all. So when I start this conversation, often with students, but I also have this conversation sometimes with parents too, I start, if I can, by showing them a picture like this of a bland, boring and empty room. And I'm using this image metaphorically, of course, because what I'm saying is this room is a metaphor for what our lives would be like without the arts and creativity. They would be exactly like this, empty, uninspiring, and just void of any character. So, metaphorically speaking, this is what our lives would be like without the arts. 2 years ago, I read Ben Lerner's novel, 1004, and it's never going to be a favourite novel of mine. It's quite ambiguous, but even though it perhaps is never going to be a favourite book, the narrator rhetorically asks in that book at one point this question: if art has no value, then why do we put paintings on hospital walls? And that concept has stayed with me ever since. And in my own mind, I started to play with that concept. And I started to broaden it out, not just to hospitals, but to other buildings that have importance. So I know where I work in a college, there are lots of art. There's lots of art on the wall. Why? When that art has really nothing to do with what is being taught in that particular part of the college. Why is it there? But in terms of healthcare, I then started to think about nursing homes. I started to think about hospices, buildings which are designed to give very ill patients end-of-life care, palliative care, or simply to look after them as they come towards the end of their lives. And what I realised when I thought about this, as this picture demonstrates, is that we don't get these people to use microscopes or to use Bunsen burners or to think about the periodic table. We actually get a lot of the time these patients to do art, painting, drawing, dancing, music, and so on. So clearly art has a place, and we might not really be conscious of it because we just expect it to be there. Going back to 2020, I'm sure that we are all still relatively familiar with pictures like this. I don't know which motorway this is, but this was during lockdown, that strange dystopian time when we were encouraged to phone the police if we thought our neighbours were having a party. Yes, it really did happen. And I ask again, what were we doing during these very quite miserable, bleak days of lockdown? Even though the weather was pretty okay at times, what were we doing? Because we were all inside, we were watching films, we were streaming films, we were making things, knitting, crocheting, we were reading, people might have been taking photographs. There was a whole bunch of artistic endeavours that was going on during this time. So again, the arts were there when we needed it. And there is this belief that the arts has a medicinal quality, that as humans, we simply cannot be serious all of the time because it's unhealthy. So the arts give us that escapism in order to live our lives as best we can. We've now got terms for this like wellness or mindfulness. We didn't have these terms, even 10 years ago, I don't think. And they have become buzzwords in the 21st century. So in summary, when times got tough, the arts were there when we needed them. Perhaps unscientifically, I recently did a search on Google to see how many hits I got or search results came back. And I found that whereas the term science, got just over 5 billion hits, I found that when I typed in the words arts into Google, I got over 16 billion hits in the same amount of time, 0.02 seconds, however long it takes. So again, statistically, this suggests that there is far more information on the world's largest search engine for the arts than science. And this is a conflict to me because when you look at education in the last 10 years, it has been very much STEM. So there seems to be a disparity here between the relevance of STEM to everyone and the relevance of the arts to everyone, and how much of the internet is actually to do with either. When we talk about fiscal contributions, the arts last year in 2024 contributed approximately £126 billion to the UK economy. That's a lot of money. And even if you look at this from a financial point of view, only a fool would therefore say the arts have no value, because if we didn't have the arts, the UK, as well as a lot of other countries around the world, would be significantly poorer. Last month, I read Ali Smith's book, Public Library, which is a collection of short stories which is also split between moments or sections of journalism or non-fiction. And in one of those sections, there is mention to these two acts from 1850 and 1964. And this is a quote from the book that the person that she was speaking to at the time said that in all of the cuts to libraries in the last 10 years, of which 108 have closed since 2016, that there was no talk of the Public Libraries Act, and there was no talk of the Public Libraries and Museums Act of 1964 either. And as this paragraph states, libraries are part of our inheritance. To enshrine something in law suggests it's something to do with our human right to have access to libraries. Because if you close libraries, you're essentially preventing people from learning, you're preventing people from growing, and you're also to some extent perhaps controlling knowledge as well with the closure of these libraries. Okay, libraries might cost a bit of money to run. However, I'm sure that there are many people up and down the country who would be more than happy to donate money to keep them running, because the benefits of a library are huge. So it's interesting that in law, access to books and literature have been there, and yet in all recent talk of library closures, I haven't heard any of them mentioned, either of these acts mentioned once. To look at statistics from the Literacy Foundation, they do a survey every year looking at the reading habits of young people, and for somebody that believes in the power of literature like myself, these statistics are frightening. Just under 35% of 8 to 18-year-olds stated that they enjoy reading, which is 8.8% down compared to 2023. And just over 20%, a fifth, said that they read every day. Of course, students are reading something every day. It tends to be on a screen and social media, so that is a good thing. However, books offer so much more. From my own experience, I know that 80% of students who are older than 16 struggle to gain a grade 4 in English language after repeated resits. And part of this is because of just the sense of alienation regarding reading, We've got lots of students now who see reading as kind of alien. And when they do read, they are often alienated because there's lots of vocabulary that they just don't understand. So that's a significant barrier that we have at the moment in the UK, but I'm sure other countries as well. Why is Mickey Mouse here? Mickey Mouse is here because our political establishment in the UK, who you would hope would come out with pretty profound stuff, have not been doing so, because politicians have been mentioned in Mickey Mouse degrees, which to me is Mickey Mouse talk. And of course, they are referring here to the arts. So not only do we have issues regarding the problems with getting children to read regularly, we also have issues with our elected representatives also adding counterproductive contributions to the discussion. There is no such thing as a Mickey Mouse degree. Why is a lack of reading a problem? Well, it can lead to weaker reading skills, such as comprehension. In other words, students are unable to just process and make sense of what they're reading. It can also lead to weaker writing skills, for example, punctuation, spelling, paragraphing, and being able to put thoughts into paper or onto paper. But it also is more than reading and writing. It's also to do with the growth of adults or teenagers per se, or children per se. So a lack of reading leads to less effective critical thinking, evaluation, and analysis skills. In terms of people, in terms of culture, a lack of reading makes people less aware of one another, socio-politically, culturally, and also emotionally, such as empathy, humility, and what is known as emotional literacy. It also makes people less aware of history, and there is that proverb which is again doing the rounds right now, which is those that don't know history are destined to repeat it, because they don't know what humans have already done to each other and how it turned out last time. As a kind of a footnote there, nothing that is going on in the world right now is without precedent. Something similar has happened before somewhere. And that's, I suppose, a kind of a scary thought in a way, because it seems that we don't learn from the past. Literature enables you to do that. That's why we need to take it seriously. And if you're not reading, you're not learning about the past, and you will probably repeat the same mistakes. In this talk, I showed the audience these words. These would be known as low-frequency words in vocabulary acquisition, so the way in which people learn vocabulary. And they're low-frequency words because they are words which you don't encounter or use all of the time. Going back to the idea of social media, whereas it's true that young people might be reading, they are probably not reading Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram posts which include these words a lot of the time. And these are the words that young people are confronted with right now when they retake their GCSE in English language. The question is, if they don't know these words, how are they going to perform well in an exam? Perhaps if they had read more when they were younger, they would have been able to develop their vocabulary sufficiently to know what these words mean, or to break these words down grammatically, for example, prefixes, suffixes, and so on. So if children aren't reading, they are going to struggle in later life. So what barriers exist in the arts? And I think there's two, at least, that I can think of. One of them is a barrier in terms of grammar. In English, we don't actually have a verb to art. Nobody says they are arting right now. Nobody says in the past tense that they arted yesterday. So in our own language, there's a gap in terms of how we describe the process or the action of doing something creative. We do, though, have two adjectives, and we also have two adverbs. So it's quite interesting to realise we don't actually have a verb. We can't express the act of actually doing something artistic. Another barrier is one of representation. The image of Shakespeare has come to represent all of literature, whereas Van Gogh there stood at his easel is what people think of when you ask them, did you do any art today? The brain in those people immediately makes them think of painting with a palette, perhaps wearing a beret. However, art is much broader than this. When you ask somebody, did you do any art yesterday? They could say, yes, I did. I knitted a scarf yesterday. They could say, yes, I designed a new flower bed in my garden. They could even say, yes, I did yesterday. I decided what colour to paint my kitchen. But they won't, because the issue with the term art is people suggest it's only being stood at an easel painting a vase of flowers. Of course, art encompasses anything that is creative. So there's a grammatical barrier, but also one of representation and what we think of when we think about the arts. I want to just turn then to where this leaves the education system. We have heard lots of talk in recent years about STEM, and I think it's true, without looking at specific statistics, that the number of students who are taking STEM at college or at university has increased. And of course, I'm not saying those subjects aren't important, they are. My argument, though, is we need both. So instead of STEM, can we please have STEAM? Can we please have a truly balanced curriculum at all levels, at all ages? Because in this time of austerity and funding cuts, it's always the arts that get cut first. And that is the creative stuff that many of us will do more frequently every day, perhaps when we get home from work or college or school. So I'm a big supporter in saying, can we please include the A and make it STEAM? That is because the word education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to lead out, which means to bring out. And I interpret this that students will only reach their full potential when they are given a balanced curriculum. So both sides of this Venn diagram. Unfortunately, whenever we have cuts, it's always the right-hand side that has to bear the brunt. And the reason for that is because people don't appreciate the value of these subjects. Okay, I could go back to that image of the room at the beginning. If we didn't have the subjects in the right-hand side of this Venn diagram, our lives would be pretty bland. So it's only when students have a balanced curriculum that they're able to reach their full potential. However, there's going to be a point, and that's why I used a Venn diagram as well, where science and art combine. If we think of art as beauty, as something aesthetic, even a physicist would say there's beauty in the solar system. A mathematician might say there's beauty in equations. A biologist might say there's beauty in a stem of DNA or in the way a cell looks under a microscope. So even the most scientific of scientists or the most mathematical of mathematicians will say the reason why they like the subject is because it has beauty to them. And often things that we ascribe value to often is because we ascribe beauty to it. So there's going to be a point when art and science combine. So it's not just a case of something that's binary. As I have already said, I spend a lot of my time with students getting them to understand that literature has relevance. It's been written for a reason, it has a voice. What is the text saying to us? We don't just read because we're bored, or waiting for a train in a train station, or waiting for a filling at the dentist. We read because the text that we're reading has historical significance. I see texts as historical documents. They tell us things, they teach us things about the past, and they hold a mirror up to the past. And it's only by doing that do we then avoid making the same mistakes again. It's only by looking back that we can move forward. So, taking English and literature out of the classroom, what is this text saying to us? What does this text tell us about what's going on out there? Because you're not going to be in a classroom forever. What is this text telling us about what's going on out there? And that is where the true power of literature comes from. And people know that literature has power. Here is a selection of news stories that have been around recently from both sides of the Atlantic, where both America and the UK are changing texts or banning texts because those texts are too powerful for the political agenda of that time. In my personal view, this is a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake because firstly, you cannot edit a published text because it's published. You can edit a manuscript as part of the proofing process, but you cannot edit or change a published text. You can censor a published text, you can get rid of things you don't want people to read, but you cannot edit something that has been published. That's the first problem. The second problem is that to ban a text suggests that there is a complete lack of trust in educators who are skilled in dealing with sensitive who are trained and able to deal with sensitive content well. It shows a complete lack of trust. So the Labour government in Wales, for example, that have taken Of Mice and Men off the reading list, do not trust teachers to deal with that content sensitively. And if you get rid of language in this way, you are preventing a conversation from happening. Okay, the language in that novel is not great to our standards, but what could that language teach us about who we were as a human race, and perhaps what to avoid later? If you get rid of that language, that conversation has gone. So there is no ability there to teach students that particular skill. You also cannot be a hypocrite. You cannot support the removal of text to protect students, in inverted quotes, protect, whilst also showing anger to some Republican kind of policies in the US that have banned novels which conflict with a Republican agenda. You cannot have it both ways. You either allow literature to exist as it is, or you don't. You can't pick and choose how you see text. So I think changing text like this is a big mistake. So people know the power of literature, and to censor it, to get rid of it in this way, or to change it, is shutting down the power of it. And if anything is going to have relevance, it's going to be because it's powerful. So these are all texts which are around right now and students could study. Looking at what I've put in bold, look at what these texts teach us. This is what students are learning about when they teach this text. They're not just learning about the story. They're not just learning about the characters. They're learning about the context of that text and the themes that that text presents. All of this is still relevant, sometimes many years after these texts were written. So, for example, The Taming of the Shrew was written around 1592. We're still in society now debating what is marriage, what is masculinity, what does it mean to be male, how are men supposed to interact with women, and vice versa. We're still talking about gender norms and gender stereotypes. So by studying that text, students are able to access this information and apply it to everyday life. That is the joy and the beauty and the power of literature. It tells us things to help us understand who we are as a society and as a human race. So asking yourself, where was art in your life today? Could be of any of these things. And like I said, when you ask somebody, did you do art today? They will often say no because they didn't paint a picture, when they could have done many of these things. We all wear clothes, I would presume. The reason we are wearing those clothes is because they have particular beauty to us. So that has been made, our clothes have been made. There's an artistry to them. So we're effectively wearing works of art. So if you are wearing clothes today, chances are you have had some contact with some form of art, as in fashion, textiles, etc. Even just randomly and quite trivially nowadays, choosing the best filter for your photos is artistic. When I did this slide, I thought, I'm going to try and find something like paint for the border, as you can see here on the right-hand side. That took nanoseconds, but it was an artistic decision. So we are always in contact with the arts. So to suggest otherwise is just inaccurate and wrong. We're doing something artistic every day. So just to finish off then, in order for all of those things to exist, we need to remember that they need to be studied first. In order to make the clothes on our backs, somebody needs to study fashion. In order for somebody to make music for us to listen to, somebody needs to have studied music, and so on and so forth. And in terms of literature, in order to go into a bookshop and expect to find new literature on the shelves to read, somebody somewhere has either got to study literature or creative writing. Because if they didn't, we wouldn't have half the stuff that we have right now in the arts in society. So these things need to be studied. And the domino effect is, if you start to get rid of art courses, it's going to have a negative impact in years to come, when nobody is going to be able to do those things because nobody trained in them. And we're going to start to perilously edge towards the depiction of that room that I started this presentation with. So my saying, and I say this to students a lot and to parents who I see, for example, at open evenings and things, I say that we may need science to help us live, but we need the arts to make life worth living. And I think that just sums up the value of the arts to everyone. So that is the talk that I gave recently. Can we please champion the arts? Because if we don't, they're going to die out, and we'll only have ourselves to blame, and it will only have a negative consequence on all of us in the future. So study the arts, we need them. Thanks for watching.